In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how to make this really simple clutch bag. It's got a little bit of a twist to it though, because I've quilted the front and the back. I haven't quilted the bottom of the bag here, but I've actually made a little cutout and put like almost like a reverse applique behind there with a different coloured fabric. You could do this in as many squares as you wanted to. I just think it has a nice little touch. It fastens with a magnetic snap. It only uses 4 pieces of fabric in total, and it's really easy to make. And fabric wise, you could use so many different types of fabric. So I've just used a quilting weight of cotton. It is interfaced. I've used an H640 on there to give it a little bit of stability, but imagine this if you were to make it out of a glitter fabric for a special occasion, or a faux leather if you wanted that to look really expensive. I think that would work really well as well. But if you're making things to sell, or you're making a lot of them as gifts, they're very quick to make as well. So here's how you do it. So quite simply, I've got 4 pieces of fabric, one for the back and the flap, one for the front, and 2 pieces cut to the same for the linings. Now do bear in mind, if you're going to use a directional fabric like I have here, so this is the way it's going to go together, do be aware that when this is folded over, it's going to be upside down. So we're going to be working with the back fabric upside down. So there the front goes on, that folds over, and it's all the right way around. It does mean that the fabric on the back is upside down. I don't have a problem with that. The only other way you could get around that is to join 2 pieces of fabric together with the seam across the top so that it lies in the same direction on each side, and I don't mind it upside down on the back. Otherwise, you can of course use a non-directional piece of fabric. So the first thing I'm going to do is to attach the magnetic snap to the front here. So I can actually measure or gauge where that's going to go. So I'll be fitting it to the outside piece. Oh, I've put my fusible fleece on the wrong side, by the way, I forgot to mention. I'm using H640. I think for a bag of this kind of width, you will need some kind of interfacing, because otherwise when you hold it, it's just all going to flop. So H640 for me is perfect. You could use a foam, like a Bosal foam, or maybe a firmer interfacing, but I think you're going to need something for that. So this is how it goes. So there's my front piece, there's my lining and my outer piece. So where that folds over is where I'm going to want to put the clasp. So you can gauge this yourself. So I'm going to just fold this in half and crease to mark the center point here. And I can put a mark there just so that you can see. And then when I fold this over, I need the clasp to be about 1 inch from the bottom of the lining section. So don't pull this too tight, because you won't be able to get anything in the bag when it's closed. So we'll need to leave about 1 inch, 2.5 centimeters of the fold over here, and then just mark about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters from the bottom. So when I fold this over again, that's where I want my clasp to be. So I know that's the center mark, and I've measured where that folds over. I'll measure this for you as well. I just thought I'd explain how I work out where the clasp is going to go, because if you want to make a bag of a different size, then it may well be in a different place. So mine is centrally, could use a smaller ruler, 3 inches from the top. And your 3 inches, just bear with me while I see what that is in centimeters, is about 8 centimeters from the top. And this one will be 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters from the top of the lining section only. Let me fold that in half and crease it. So it's just a little bit out there, so I can mark exactly where that's going to be. Put my ruler down. So the fatter part of the snap, I'm using a 14mm snap. You could use larger. If you want an 18mm, that's fine. The fatter part is going to go on the bag, and the thinner part is going to go on the lining. So the fatter part's got the magnet in it. You may have seen this a few times, so apologies if you fast forward this bit if you don't want to see how to do it again. But basically I'm going to put the back of the snap with a hole over the mark where I want this to go, and draw 2 lines, and then you can either use your quick unpick or a very sharp pair of scissors and make a snip straight through those lines and the wadding. So try and keep the hole small, because you can always make a small hole bigger if you need to. And then we'll push the prongs of the snap through the holes, pop the back on, and you'll probably find it easier to squish those prongs open. And then on the lining section, I'm actually going to take a small piece of fabric and just pop this on the back to strengthen it a little bit, just to help to stop the fabric pulling. So I'm using a glue stick just to hold that in place. Again, draw over the back of the snap, 2 tiny snips, snap goes through. If you are measuring this for yourself, by the way, don't put the snap too close to the edge. An inch or 2.5 centimetres is probably the perfect distance, because we're going to have a seam allowance and we need to be able to get our sewing machine foot around here. So if you're too close to the edge, you're not going to be able to manoeuvre your sewing machine around it. Right, now then, with the front of the bag, that goes there, that goes there, that goes there. I'm going to quilt the back and the flap. You can quilt this part if you like. Do that before you put the clasp on, because otherwise you'll be sewing around it. But I'm just going to do the back and the flap section. And I'm going to do a 45-degree line across here, and then mark 1-inch increments all the way across. You don't have to quilt if you don't want to. I just think it gives it a nice little bit of texture. Doesn't matter how patterned the fabric is either. It can still look nice when it's quilted. And cross hatching like this, so just sewing straight lines, is an easy way of doing this. But if you wanted to maybe do a little bit of free motion embroidery, outline some of the flowers I could have done on this fabric, for instance, or a little bit of meandering. If that's your quilting preference, then that's up to you. But as I said earlier, you don't have to quilt any of it. You could quilt all of it. That's up to you. Right, so I'm now going to go in opposite directions. So create these diamond-shaped quilt lines. I am using a heat erasable pen. Remember always to do yourself a patch test if you're going to use one of those, because they can sometimes bleach your fabric, so just make sure it's going to be okay. Otherwise you could use chalk or any kind of marking pencil. Then I'm going to lengthen the stitch on my sewing machine to a 2.8, and I like to start in the centre, and I'm going to sew over all of those quilt lines. Now, because I used a heat erasable pen, I can now waft my iron over there and the pen marks completely disappear. And I'm going to round off the bottom of the flap section of my bag. You can leave it square if you like. I just thought it might be quite nice to just make that into a curve. So I'm just looking for my pen. Here we go. So take something like a ribbon, really. It doesn't really matter the size here. And I'm just going to draw an arc around these pieces. Remember, your fabric's going to be folded over so that it's upside down. So make sure you're cutting it from the right direction. And we'll just cut around here, and this one, and then we'll do the same on the lining. It's from the side, remember, where the fastening is. So it's on this side, And then I thought this might be a little bit of fun. So again, you can gauge how your bag's going to look at any time by doing this. So there's my flap. And I'm going to cut into one of these diamond shapes. You could do this randomly all over if you like. I'm just going to do one here and put a little bit of my yellow fabric behind it. So it's just a little bit of fun. So as I'm looking at it, that seems to be the one to do. So slightly to one side, not too close to the edge. And I'm going to take my sharpest scissors and make a little snip in the center all the way through and cut to the corners of the stitches. So just into the square, but not through the stitches on all four corners. And then from the back, I'm just going to trim back the fleece. So I'm peeling that away from the fabric. I know it's kind of adhered on, but you can peel a lot of it back just to make it a little less bulky. So I'm hanging on to the fabric point, peel back some of that and snip it. There is actually a little pouch to keep your hair straighteners or heat guns in my So Useful book that uses the same technique. It's quite fun. Then let's take a scrap square of my fabric, which is bigger than the 1-inch square. I'm going to fold these pieces back and again just pop a little bit of glue behind those. So fold them back up to the stitch line. Like so. A bit more glue on that one, I think. So I've got a nice neat square hole on this side. I could go a little bit more into that one, I think. And I'm going to give this a press as well. Even with the glue, it seems to want to bounce back a little bit, and I want that to be a nice crisp edge. That's better. So you can see I've got my square hole. I've just got a little loose thread there. I don't normally use two pairs of scissors, by the way. One's a little bit sharper than the others. And then I'm going to put the yellow behind it. So again, I'm going to secure this with a little bit of glue on the back, just while I sew. Pop that on there. And I'm just going to top stitch very close to the edge. So there you can see you've got that nice little design feature. Might be quite sweet if you're using a plain fabric to put or fussy cut part of a pattern fabric behind it, so you could make like a little window that has a flower in it. That could be a little bit of fun. But I just think it's a nice technique, adds something a little bit different to your work. Let's put this together. So I'm going to take the front panel and the front panel lining, put the lid on that, and these are going to be sewn right sides together just across the top. And I'm using around about 1/4 inch seam allowance, so I'm actually using the edge of my foot as the seam guide, so it might be just a little bit more. Then I'm going to take the lining over to the wrong side and press it with the seam. Actually, I'm going to roll that over just a little bit so you can just see a tiny border of the yellow on the top. That's not going to affect the size or the construction of the bag. It's just a tiny little bit across the top. It looked like a piece of piping going across there. Just finishes it off a little bit. And on top of that, I'll top stitch or edge stitch across the top as well. So I can lengthen my stitch again. This isn't a seam, I can do a longer stitch and sew. And then we can piece this together. So take the outside of your bag and put the straight edges together, and we're just going to sew a little way across the bottom through all of the layers. So I will put a couple of pins in there just to secure it as I'm sewing. So the part I'm sewing here is basically going to be where the turning gap is. So around about 4 inches or about 20 centimetres, something like that will be fine. And then we'll put the lining on top. So those are my 2 pieces from the outside facing each other. My lining here is going to go facing down, so the clasp is facing down on top of the fabric. Do it from this side. Just hold it with a few pins. Now this time I'm going to sew all the way around the edge apart from this section, and that will give me a complete seam all the way around the outer fabric but a gap in the lining so that I can turn it the right side out. Then I'm going to just trim off the corners. So my lining's moved a little bit, that sometimes happens, that's fine. I'm going to trim into the curves. You could use pinking shears or make little V-shaped cuts if you wish, just to cut down on the bulk and make those curves a little bit more curvy. And again, snip across that corner too. You can trim this back as well if you feel you need to. I think with the padding you don't need to, but you know, if you wanted to, that's fine. And then let's turn the whole thing the right side out. Now when you turn it through the first time, it'll still kind of be inside out, although you've turned it through, with the gap at the bottom of the lining here. If you're going to sew by machine, make sure your stitches are inside that stitch line, because otherwise you're going to see them on the outside of the bag. Your stitches will be wonky. Or you can sew that by hand, which is what, to be honest, I prefer to do. So either a little slip stitch or a ladder stitch, but try and keep the stitches quite small so they're as invisible as you can make them. So I like to take the knot inside the seam, and I'm just going to do a little slip stitch, so into one side of the fabric and out of the other, and then come back down directly underneath. I'll show you closer in just a second when we get going. And again, I'm trying not to take these stitches all the way through to the front, so I'm just catching the lining. So when I fold this over into the fabric at the bottom, and before I pull the needle through, I'm just going to catch the fold of the fabric at the top, and then take the needle directly underneath where you've just sewn, in and out, and back through the top, and then just keep pulling it tight. The smaller the stitches you make, the more invisible they're going to be. And if you prefer to use a ladder stitch, maybe if this is something that you're going to sell and you want the stitches to be completely invisible, then that would be the one to use. Then we can turn this through again, push out the corners, I'm just going to get my turning tool into those corners and push them out so they're nice and square. Just got a loose thread there that needs to be snipped away. And one there. And then we'll give it another press. And then just to finish this off, I'm going to top stitch from the flap just all the way around here. One more thread just to cut away here. And that's my bag finished. So I hope you like the bag. I think it's a nice size clutch bag to use of evening time, and as you can see, it's really simple to make, but not just as a clutch bag. How about using this to keep pencils or makeup brushes and things like that in as well? So I hope you like it. Hope you make lots of them, and I'll see you again soon. Bye bye.